Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this session with Colin Curtis, Managing Director of TBL Services, who help businesses balance profits with environmental and social responsibility. My name's Isaac. I'm on the ADM side of this session today. So just for those who don't know, ADM, we're an IT managed service provider based in Canterbury in Kent. We've got over 80 staff members now, with 3/4 of those being in the technical and service delivery team. Combined, we've got 40 years experience because our business has been going since the 80s and we're one of the longest running IT MSPs in the area. So we're putting on this webinar today purely with the aim to not just support our customers and our future customers with IT support, but also with their sustainability goals. So I'll give you a quick rundown of what we're going to do today. So if you have any questions, please just pop them in the Q&A box up in the top right of your screen. You'll be able to find that. And what we'll do is we'll come to them at the end of the session and I'll relay those to Colin at the end and we'll have a little Q&A session. We won't interrupt him mid-flow today, so we'll let him do his presentation and then we'll come to the questions at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Colin for this session. So Colin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. And good afternoon to everybody who's attending this. As Isaac said, my name is Colin Curtis and I'm the Managing Director of TBL. And today I'm going to talk to you about greener goals. So let me see if I can share my screen with you. I'm hoping the technology works here. Okay, Isaac, I can see you on the screen. I've got a thumbs up, that's fantastic. So what we're going to go and talk about is how your business can start its journey towards becoming a more sustainable workplace. And I should start off by saying a little bit about who TBL are. So TBL, first of all, stands for triple bottom line. That's about balancing profits, which every business understands and focuses on, with people and planet, which is what we as human beings, we're all programmed to go and want to look after each other and to take care of the planet we live on. But when we go to work, it's a bit difficult to try and work out how we balance those personal views in with those profitable priorities of work. So we try and help companies to go and balance those things out. We focus on supporting companies, developing strategies, looking at carbon accounting, their supply chains. But in particular, what we focus on is reporting and helping companies tell their stories. So we're what's called a B corporation, which is not one worse than an A corporation. So it's a very high standard of environmental and social responsibility. And we work a 4-day week, or as I like to put it, we have a 3-day weekend. Because in this crazy world we live in nowadays, everybody is on emails quite often. We have customers who are abroad, so we like to try and give our staff time to go and recharge at the weekends. In terms of who we work with, so we work with lots of small businesses. I can't see you all at the moment, so I'm not sure where you're all from, but I imagine that most of you are from small and medium-sized businesses here. And we work with a lot of kind of giant-sized companies as well. It keeps things interesting. So, and we're able to go and share experiences, and often many of our customers are suppliers to our larger customers as well. And we like to be good friends with people because this stuff is quite personal. So it's important to get to know the people that we're working with. And it's important that we all share that passion for making a better world. That's enough about us. You didn't come here to hear about that. So what we're going to go and cover today is what is sustainability. So what it is, why it's important for your business, how you get started, so a few practical steps to get you going, why you should share your journey, how you go and communicate it, and a few do's and don'ts, and something called green hushing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. And a bit about if anybody wants any help, then how we can go and help you. And after all of that, there'll be time for some questions at the end. So let's start off on what is sustainability. I always joke that if you ask 10 people what sustainability means, you'll get 10 answers. It's a very vague word. There's no one definition of it. To a lot of people, it just means the environment. There are some formal definitions out there, but they're not very clear. Some people call it corporate social responsibility, not so much nowadays. Some people call it ESG, environmental, social and governance. But I always like to go and think of these goals that you can see on the screen. So 17 brightly coloured goals known as the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, to give them a more lofty name. And these were 17 goals agreed by pretty much every world leader back in 2015 to go and tackle all the big issues in the world. And the nice thing about this is that it's a common language. So even if we don't know what to go and call sustainability or what it means, we know that what we're trying to do is to tackle these big goals. And they're not just environmental, they're social, and even to some extent economic as well. So if we're aligning with these, then we're aligning with the big challenges in the world, and we're focusing probably on the same things that other companies are doing as well. So why should any business care about this? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Apart from the fact it's good for the planet, and apart from the fact it's good for people, there were some studies done back in 2016 that worked out that if we all got behind these goals and if they were achieved, we'd generate $12 trillion of new business value every year, and we create an extra 380 million jobs. So even if you're not a kind of greenie, even if you're not very environmentally friendly or anything like that, this is good for the economy. It's good for people. And some immediate figures at the bottom of this. 90% of people believe it's important the businesses support the goals. So there's a good chance that your customers believe that you should be doing something about the goals, and 78% say they're more likely to buy from companies that support the goals as well. And from an employee attraction and retention point of view, about a third of young people turn down job offers because the company that made them the offer didn't actually match their environmental and social views. So it's important from an employment point of view to make sure that your business is doing the right thing so you can attract the latest and the brightest talent. And the good news is 90% of leading businesses, and by that, we're looking at the FTSE 100, which are the 100 largest listed companies in the UK, they're already supporting the goals. So they've been reporting what they're doing for years and making some good progress towards them. So quite a few good kind of business and practical reasons why companies should be getting behind them. ADM is a good example. He's been doing some good work on this for a while now. And if that wasn't enough, there's a ton of acronyms coming your way. There's lots of regulations out there. There's lots of frameworks, all of which are frankly a little bit confusing. If anybody's been working in this area, I'm sure you can identify with the fact that there's quite a lot of questionnaires you have to fill in nowadays to go and apply for business off your customers, or if you're working in the public sector, to go and do business in the public sector as well. So within Europe, there's something called CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that's creating a lot of waves out there at the moment and forcing companies to go and do an awful lot of reporting. And there's a couple of other acronyms, CSDDD, CBAM. Financial reporting standards are starting to incorporate this. So the International Financial Reporting Standards that tell companies what they should be doing on their annual reports. That's starting to build sustainability into it. The UK government public sector has something called PPN 0621, very catchy name, which shows that companies that are applying for business with the public sector have to have a carbon reduction plan on the website. SECA and ESOS are two regulations for kind of small and medium-sized businesses that say they've got to report their carbon footprint. And there are frameworks out there that a lot of your customers may use, like CDP and EcoVadis. So there's a lot of regulations out there now, and probably even more coming up as well. The good thing about all of this is that if your business is doing the right thing, and if it's focused on taking some good, simple, practical steps, it's going to stay ahead of these regulations. You don't have to worry about them quite as much as long as you're actually doing the right thing. It only gets to be a problem is if you don't have a plan and you don't have a strategy in place. So how do you get started? So working out where to start is probably the question we hear most from organizations. But they find this stuff quite overwhelming and they really struggle to work out what to do. And maybe somewhat controversially, I blame my profession for that one. I think people who work in sustainability can be often guilty of talking about what companies are doing wrong, but not always giving very clear steps to go and show them what to do that's right. So I want to try and change some of that. And I think the key starting point on this is working out what your priorities are. Sustainability is an incredibly big and broad topic. But even if we think of just the environmental side of things, on the environmental side of it, there are lots and lots of topics, whether we're looking at waste, whether we're looking at plastic, whether we're looking at biodiversity, and lots of different things. And if you look at the social issues, there's a tremendous amount of different social issues out there, whether it's looking at workers' rights, supply chain, how people are paid, how they're managed, human rights, forced labor, etc. It's a lot. And then within governance, corporate governance is a really big issue as well. And if you look at those 17 sustainable development goals, they're a great starting point, but 17 is quite a lot. So over time, what we've been doing is researching what companies have been doing, looking at what they've been focusing on. And one thing we've realized is that out of those goals, there are a few things that really matter. So the biggest of those ones is net zero. So I don't think it's going to be news to anybody that climate action is possibly the goal that companies focus on the most and the one that generates the most attention. So looking at net zero is a really good starting point for your business if you've not already started doing that. And that aligns with Goal 13, climate action for the Sustainable Development Goals. Something that's not on people's agenda quite as much at the moment, but is really important, is biodiversity. So when you watch the news, you'll increasingly see biodiversity being talked about, and you'll hear it maybe referred to in terms of species loss or nature degradation. And there's a lot of talk about biodiversity being the next carbon. And by that, meaning the next big issue that people really need to go and focus on. So we found that a lot of companies at the moment are not doing much about this, or if they are doing much about it, they're not talking about it. And we find that's because people are confused on where to start or even what the term means. We'll give you a couple of tips on that, but it's not complicated and possibly the most fun thing to focus on. The next one of those is waste, which aligns with Goal 12, responsible consumption and production. But depending on the kind of business you are, that could mean a few different things. If you're like us, you're just a small business and you're based in offices and you're not selling anything or making anything at all, so all you're providing is services, the chances are your waste is pretty low. It might just be the food you buy, it might just be, a few bits of marketing materials, not any packaging or anything like that. But even within that, everybody can make a difference to go and look at reducing plastic or look at recycling more or looking at minimizing waste overall. For those companies that are manufacturing or selling goods, then there's a concept called circular economy that's important to go and look at. And that might consider how you're designing products, how you're sourcing them, and how they're going to be disposed of at the end of their natural life. The next topic to look at is gender equality. So I don't think it's any great secret that in business generally that we've got a long way to go before we get to gender parity. There was a news article this morning saying that in the UK, there is a target of 40% of women to be in leadership positions, and we're somewhat behind that target, but making some good progress. But generally in most industries, women tend to go and have quite a significant pay gap from men, mainly because of that gap between lower paid jobs and higher paid jobs. So there are things that we can all do to try and level that gap, both in terms of bringing more women into the workplace, but in particular, helping women to go and advance into more senior positions. And the last one that's increasingly important is living wage. So making sure that people are paid enough to be able to go and have a decent life, basically, and to go and afford everything they need to get a reasonable standard of living. So in the UK, we've got some pretty decent guidelines around living wage. We've got some good standards. The current government's actually upped minimum wage to be closest to living wage as well. So there's some good things we can do around there, but there's more that can take place in supply chains, thinking of what your suppliers do. So 5 topics there that every single business can think about and can get started on. So here's a few tips on what maybe your business can do to start taking some positive action. There's a good chance that your business is already doing some of these. So it might be time just to go and take stock and think about what you're doing and really start focusing on it a bit more. So net zero, a good starting point is measuring your carbon footprints. Now, a lot of you may have heard of scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, and scope 3 emissions. They can be quite confusing. Scope 3 emissions in particular can be quite daunting, but honestly, starting anywhere is fine. So you can start with your scope 1 and 2 emissions and start measuring that. And as you start to get more advanced, you can look at your scope 3 emissions as well. But just generally doing something to get going is great. Using renewable energy is probably one of the biggest things you can go and do. So when we talk about scope 2 emissions, and that's usually the electricity that your business buys, by buying renewable energy on a green tariff, or in a better world, maybe installing solar panels on your business, you can get rid of those scope 2 emissions entirely by doing that. So switching to renewable energy is probably one of the single biggest things that makes a difference. When we look at biodiversity, that can be really simple. That can be just some investment in nature. Usually the biggest difference you can make is financial. So it might be investing in some tree planting. It might be investing in some wildflower meadows or peatland restoration. Anything your business can go and do to go and promote reduce degradation and enhancement of nature. And maybe you could partner with a local wildlife trust as well. There are lots of good organisations out there that you can work with and maybe get your employees involved to go and start doing some good things to look after the planet that we're living on. So when we look at waste, if you're a company that's selling products, and in particular if you're a manufacturer, you might want to think about designing those products with end of life in mind. So looking at, instead of designing something to go and get the optimum usage out of it, you really want to be thinking about actually what happens once that product has finished the end of its life and design backwards from there. So designing it with a kind of disposal or even maybe reassembly in mind. And if you're not a manufacturer, just thinking of simple steps you can do to go and reduce waste in your offices, particularly waste that doesn't degrade as quickly like plastic. Gender equality is something we always causes quite a discussion about how we can do things here. Common thing we hear from a lot of businesses, in particular in male-dominated sectors like construction or IT, is that we'd love to try and do more, but we don't get enough women applying for jobs. So there are a lot of things that can be done there, like maybe trying to launch programs to encourage women into the business. If it's a more male-dominated environment, there might be an outreach program going into schools or colleges and providing role models to go and say why this particular environment is actually a good place for young women to go into the workplace. It could be getting a program to go and help more women into leadership positions. And a really big part of that is childcare. So looking at childcare programs that maybe help working mothers to be able to go and return to work and have a decent career that allows them to go and advance while still making sure that childcare is looked after. And a childcare program that looks after men as well as women. So we're not just paying more women to stay at home and encouraging men to go and work, which is increasing that gender gap. And after that is living wage. That's theoretically a little bit easier. We have a living wage accreditation in the UK. So you can go to livingwage.org. There's some really clear guidelines on that page that show you things you can do. So, a good step would be to try and gain living wage accreditation. And you might want to encourage your suppliers to do the same. So some of your suppliers may be really big companies that you can't influence, but maybe talking to your law firm, your web designers, your marketing company, and all those ones, your cleaners, for example, to go and encourage them to go and pay living wage as well. That way you can create this really nice ripple effect where you are not just making an impact in your own business, but making an impact all the way down the supply chain. Now, taking actions on things like that is something you can do quite easily. But if you really want to go and make a difference, it's time to be brave and to go and look at setting some ambitions on there. And that's That's a key component of setting a really good strategy. So if you just do those things without a stated public ambition, it's a bit like a hobby. So you could stop doing it at any point. But as soon as you go and put a public ambition out there on your website, for example, then it shows that you're serious about this one. It creates a bit of greater accountability. And it lets people know that you're doing this not just for 1 year, but you may be committed to go and do this for the future as well. So setting targets for all of these things is really an ideal thing to go and do. And here's a few examples, because people struggle with how do you set targets. You might want to set something entirely different for your business, but these are just some quick suggestions. So net zero, you could say we will achieve net zero by 2040 in line with science. Just to explain net zero a little bit, there are standards around net zero. There is something called a Science-Based Target Initiative, or SBTI for short, that defines exactly what we mean by net zero. And that generally looks at a 90% reduction across all of your emissions, so 1, 2, and 3. That's your direct and your indirect carbon footprint by 2050 at the latest. So if you were to go and set a target of being net zero by 2040, then you will be ahead of the worst possible scenario. You'd be in line with more ambitious companies, and making it in line with science as well means that you are credible. It's important to go and say that if you are setting a target for net zero, it is in line with science, because why would you not line up with science? Biodiversity is probably simpler than a lot of people think. I mean, I always think that you want to link doing positive things with things that are good for your business. So a really simple example might be that we'll plant 100 trees for each new sale. Or you might say that, you know, for each new member of staff, we'll go and plant trees. Or we, for example, whenever it's somebody's birthday in our team, we go and plant trees for their birthday. So you can make some really simple investments by linking it in with activities that link to your employees or link to your sales or anything like that. That way you're differentiating your business, you're making your employees feel good, and you're making a difference at the same time. There are organizations out there such as Ecology, so ECO, LOGI, ecology.com, it's worth checking them out, that will do things where you can quite easily go and make some gifts towards nature, and they'll go and invest and do some work on your behalf, and you can share that information on your website. Waste as well, it could be something as simple as reducing waste from your business by 50% by 2030. So waste is an interesting one, but just recycling more probably isn't going to make all the difference that you'd like. Recycling is a good thing to go and do, but ultimately we just want less waste. So targets to go and reduce waste in your business, that's a good thing to do. And gender equality really causes a lot of debate on targets. So I'm not always a fan personally of setting a target to go and say 50% of our leadership will be female by this period in time. There are lots of benefits in doing that, and that might be the outcome that you want. But sometimes it might be less contentious and more practical to actually have a target as part of a program. So as an example, you might have a target to launch an outreach program to encourage more young women to apply for roles in the business. Or you may put particular numbers against that to go and say, you know, we will provide educational opportunities for so many young women per year. So actually launching targets that link in with your talent pool is probably more effective than just looking at the outcome. And living wage, pretty simple. You might just want to gain or maybe maintain, if you've already got it, living wage accreditation. The one thing I would say is that targets should always be what's known as SMART. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So you'll see all the examples in there are in different ways. They're quite specific, doesn't want to be something vague, something you can measure, something you can actually achieve. There's no point setting a goal if you just don't have a clue how to get there. Relevance, linked to your business, and time bound or timely. So by 2030, for example. Okay, I'm throwing information out to you really, really quickly here. So hoping this is making sense, and we've got plenty of time for questions afterwards. So if you're doing all this, probably one of the most important things you can do is tell people about it. Because you're not reaping the benefits if you don't. And here's a few good reasons why it's important to share your story. So if you are getting requests from your customers about what are you doing for the environment, what are you doing around sustainability, what are you doing around social value, social responsibility, corporate governance, or any of these things, if you've got one report to go and put everything into, then that's great. Now, I would always advocate that the best way to go and tell your story is to go and create a report. So this could be just a simple PDF that's attractive to look at, maybe 20 or 40 pages long if you're just starting out, something like that. You'd be amazed how quickly you can fill 20 to 40 pages just with all the information about the good things you're doing. You can see on the screen there's an example of one that the Liverpool Airport have done that talks a little bit about money they've raised for charity, what they're prioritising, etc. But having everything in one document just means that you can easily go and share with any customer request you get to go and say, please read this. This is detail of all the good things we're up to. Second reason is it's good for marketing. There is absolutely no shame in using sustainability for marketing benefit. In fact, I'd positively encourage it. If you can make good financial benefit from sustainability, you are much more likely to go and do a lot of it. So if you're showing your customers the good things you're doing, then you're going to stand out from the crowd. So definitely use it for marketing purposes, and bear that in mind when any report is created, that you want to go and include information about your company, about what you do, and to make it as aligned with your brand and as attractive as possible. Third reason is your employees will probably love it. So employees want to work for a company that's doing the good things. And if you've got a report saying what all those good things are, it's a fantastic tool for employee engagement. And the last one, and the one I particularly care about, is it keeps companies honest. If you put a report out there saying this is what our targets are, or here's what we're doing on sustainability, you're kind of being held to account. So, and it encourages you to go and do this every year, to go and keep doing an updated report. And in turn, that encourages you to keep making progress all the time. And you want to shout about this. So when your report is done, you want to let people know that this is important. There's some really bad examples I've seen of companies that have done a phenomenal sustainability report. They're doing some fantastic things, but it's buried on their website. So if you are one of their customers, you'll go on the website and you can't see anything about sustainability anywhere. Maybe got to go and Google it, or it's buried deep in a menu. So you want to let people know it's important. Ideally, it's really good if on your top level menu on your website, you've got sustainability on there. If I'm looking at a company's website and I can see that it's got about, what we do, and all those traditional menu items, and it's got sustainability on there as well, chances are they're taking it seriously if they've been brave enough to do that. As a second best, you can put it under about. So you can see here some lovely pictures from ADM. They've got some really nicely kind of bright, attractive website, nice, attractive web page under their about, and it lists all the targets. It lists the sustainable development goals they're focused on. It lists what they're doing, the commitments they're making. So, you know, that's a really good example to go and follow. And don't forget social media as well. If you're busily saying to people that sustainability is important, but you're putting out lots of posts out there and it doesn't mention it anywhere, then there's a slight disconnect with that. So always make sure that you try and put something in your feeds on social media. All the comms figures we get show that any social media feeds on sustainability tend to go and have significantly more uptake than anything else. So it's a good way to get your brand out there too. Green hushing is a term I mentioned at the beginning of this, and not sure if anybody's ever come across this phrase before, but it's something you don't want to go and do. I imagine many of you have heard of greenwashing. Greenwashing is the idea of making environmental claims that are overblown or maybe can't be backed up. But green hushing is the fact that a lot of people are scared to actually talk about what they do because they're worried that people are going to accuse them of greenwashing. So as a result, they end up not doing anything at all, and that's not good. That doesn't inspire anybody. It doesn't encourage positive progress. So I thought I'd communicate a few really simple tips on what you can do in your business to get your message across, but not fall foul of greenwashing. And probably the most important one is about being honest. I see a lot of companies out there that put claims out there that are overblown, saying, we are the best on this, we are the most sustainable company, etc. And it surely can't be true. So we're all on a journey. We're all of us trying to figure out how to basically make a bit of money, pay the bills, while trying to not wreck the world and make it a bit of a better place. So just being honest about that and saying where you're up to, that goes down better with anybody. You want to be as authentic as you can and be honest about the challenges you faced. So when you produce a report or you put things on your website, if you found things difficult or if you've not managed to do it yet, talk about that too. You'll find people will respect your honesty. Probably the important one is be factual. So make sure you can back up all the claims you make. So if you say something is a low carbon product, you're ready to go and explain how it's low carbon and what it's low carbon compared to. There is something called the Green Claims Code in the UK, which has been launched by the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA. So you can go and quickly Google Green Claims Code UK. There's some really nice videos that explain it and some really nice guides. And that shows all the things that you should do to avoid greenwashing on there. If you don't, there is a good chance that you could get a fine of the Competition and Markets Authority. But honestly, the guidance is quite clear, and most of it is just around being factual, backing up all those claims that you can make, and avoid using terms that can't be measured. So ironically, the term sustainable is probably a bit of a no-no. Sustainable means very little. It's difficult to go and back up. Eco-friendly, how do you measure that? It's quite hard. Low carbon, you could probably back that one up as long as you give figures. So reduce waste, you can use things like that. So just avoid kind of, ambiguous terms. And don't claim to be a leader. You do see companies out there saying, we are the most sustainable company, and no one likes to show off. Basically, just be honest and factual. Follow those simple tips and you'll be good. Okay, so again, there's a lot of information, and I just want to go and close off before we open up for questions with a few areas you can go to if you want some help. So I'll talk first of all about Support the Goals. So Support the Goals is an initiative that we launched back in 2018. And it's done a lot of things over the years, but over the last year or so, what we've done is we've turned it into a place to go and share educational content. And what we're doing is we're taking all of our collective knowledge in TBL and that of our partners, and we're turning it into courses to allow people to understand these things. So there are a range of courses on there covering things like what is net zero, what is the circular economy, what is a carbon footprint, what is a science-based target, how do you measure your scope 1, 2 emissions, and we're launching new courses pretty much every month on there. So you can go on there. The bulk of the courses are absolutely free. There's no advertising on them at all. You won't get spammed as a result of signing up on any of these things. There are a few more advanced courses that might have a cost, but it's very, very low on there. But the vast majority are absolutely free. You can also get a little bit of recognition for your business. So we have a rating system that bases itself around those 5 topics that are mentioned: net zero, biodiversity, waste, gender, and circular economy. And if your business is talking about those things on your website, then you can get a rating from 0 to 5 stars. So you can get some benchmarking to understand how your business compares to others, and a nice little badge to go and share on your website to go and show how well you rate. So the web address for Support the Goals is at the bottom of this slide, and I very much encourage you to visit it to learn more. If anybody wants a hand producing a report, we do an awful lot of these. We've done over 50 of these by now, ranging from some very small businesses to, you can see on there, Google's environmental report. We help them with theirs. And it really depends on where you are on your journey as to what kind of report we produce for you. But if you're a small business just starting out, we can produce a nice, quick, simple 20-page report that's bright and attractive, talks about all the good things you're doing, right up to if you're a larger business and you've got to comply with the regulations like CSRD, we can help with that as well. And we'd help you with the graphic design, the copywriting, the project management, and you also get support from us throughout the year to go with it. Because one thing we find is that it's not a matter of just producing the report and then going away. And people want to then start thinking about the next report and how they improve it year on year. On that basis, we provide ongoing support for a lot of businesses as well. So we find a lot of people just want a bit of a phone a friend where they've got somebody's turn to go and help answer the complex questions they get, or understanding what the maze of acronyms is, maybe getting a bit of mentoring and guidance, or it might be looking at more complex things like materiality or net zero transition plans, or helping get their employees engaged. Whatever it is, we provide this ongoing support package. That means if it's within our capabilities, we can go and help you with it throughout the year. I rattled through all of that quite quickly. We're a bit ahead of time here. So just coming up to 22, but maybe we can open up for questions.
That sounds good, Colin. I will cast just your face over. Lovely. You've already sorted that for me. Perfect. Yes, so just going to pop mine on screen as well. So yeah, a couple of questions have come through that I wanted to ask you. So first of all, we've got one from Claudine, who said, how did you adjust to a 4-day week out of curiosity? And does it have a case for improving sustainability? It doesn't have to, but curious if it does. Less traveling to work, less stress, etc. Thanks. So that's from Claudine.
Thank you, Claudine. That's a good question. We get a lot of that. We get a lot of people slightly jealous of our 4-day week, to be honest with you. In terms of the reasons why we did it, a lot of it is, I think, just because I'm slightly lazy and I wanted Friday off. And I figured if I wanted Friday off, a lot of other people might do as well. But being more realistic, we've worked on the basis of managing people on outcomes rather than time they spend. So as long as people get the work done and do it on time, I don't really care when it's done. So on that basis, we figured that it might be good to start looking at whether people can have a little bit more time. I also tend to go and find that people are far more productive when they've had a bit of a break. Claudine, I don't know about you, but I find if I've had a holiday, I come back and I'm able to go and think a little bit more clearly, prioritize things a bit better. 2-day weekends never seem long enough. So on that basis, I thought, well, if every weekend felt a bit like a holiday, then surely I'm going to come back to work refreshed every single week. So we focus more on it being a 3-day weekend than a 4-day week. I don't measure productivity. I never quite actually worked out what productivity is. There doesn't seem to be any one definition of it. And like I say, as long as the staff are happy and as long as the work gets done, I don't really think there is anything else at all. But it's working out well. It was a bit of an adjustment at first. We originally started off doing a split system where our team worked, half the team worked Monday to Thursday, the other half worked Tuesday to Friday. And that didn't work very well because we only had people working together for 3 days of the week that way, and that was not good for team morale, and it confused customers. So Monday to Thursday seems to work out quite nicely for us now. In terms of that links with sustainability, we actually did some work with somebody from Oxford University a little while ago who published a paper on this. So I'll see if I can dig that out and send it on to Isaac, you to go and share with people on this call. But there was a PhD student at Oxford University who wrote something up on this, and spoiler, there was sustainability benefits around it, and he analysed not just our company, but lots of others as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. So any resources that Colin sends over to me, I can ping across over to people who are in attendance today as well. Just to note, there is still time to pop your questions in the chat just while we run through this little Q&A. As Colin said, we're a little bit ahead of time, so that's absolutely fine. I'm just remarking the Q&A box here, so there we go. So do publish questions in there. A couple of frequently asked ones that I hear a lot, Colin, for you. So one of them is, should we focus on the Sustainable Development Goals or another framework, i.e. B Corp? I know that's something we've been looking at as well, so it's quite a relevant one.
Yeah, it's a good question, Isaac. It's a way that it's not kind of either or. So the Sustainable Development Goals, they're the big goals that the world has agreed to. And they're kind of mainly based around principles like having no poverty and taking climate action, consuming and producing responsibly. Whereas a lot of these other frameworks tend to be a little bit more detailed and a bit more specific as well. And many of them, like B Corp certification, is actually aligned with the goals too. So if you go for B Corp certification, part of that, you've actually got to talk a little bit about how you are supporting those sustainable development goals as well. So, but I would advocate that probably it's best to go and start with the goals first, start with a strategy about doing the right things, take some positive actions, and then fit in with the frameworks around that rather than starting looking at a framework and then trying to fit in your positive actions around that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So there's another one, not necessarily a question, but someone's pointed out a good tip here. One of the print management companies, you can see it in the chat there, has a sustainable offering where they plant trees to offset your printing amounts at a cost. They've actually asked, would you say that would be a good place to start whilst working to reduce the printing amounts as well? You might be able to see that question in the chat as well, Colin, if you need some more context on that.
Yeah, that's all right. I've just found the button as to where they all are in the chat. Okay, I can see that. Thank you, Phil. I think that's a good thing. I mean, there's a couple of points with that. One short version, yeah, definitely a great idea. I mean, planting trees is never a bad thing. There's often a lot of talk about, is planting trees enough? And is it the right thing to go and do? I don't think there's ever a time when planting trees is a bad thing to go and do. So that's definitely great. The only point linked in with that is that term offset. So I think offsetting printing amounts like you're doing, Phil, is a terrific idea. The one thing I would be careful of is about offsetting your business as a whole. So if you were to look at the entire business and say you are carbon neutral because you have measured your carbon footprint and you've planted an amount of trees that's an equivalent of that carbon footprint, then that term of carbon neutral and offsetting your entire business is something that is becoming increasingly frowned upon. If I use a kind of slightly bad analogy, I always think it's a bit like me saying I've just had like a massive Big Mac meal and then he had a salad afterwards, and therefore that means I'm on a diet. You're sort of linking something negative like a big carbon footprint or a carbon footprint of any kind with something positive like tree planting. So you want to separate out those two things. So you want to reduce your carbon and plant trees at the same time, not plant trees because you are producing a lot of carbon. So offsetting a business and carbon neutral for a business, not great things. Offsetting your services like printing and maybe making that carbon neutral, that's okay, because you can then say we're doing this and we're reducing carbon in our business as well. Slightly complicated answer, but I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of covers it. I'm sure Phil will agree there. I was going to mention as well, just on that point, sort of opening this up to a bit of a conversation here. So as a company, we also work towards this sort of carbon offsetting as a side project rather than the main project, obviously, because we're working with you, Colin, and supporting the goals and things. But we use a company called Ecology that basically, every time someone has a birthday, we plant a number of trees in their name, and basically every opportunity we have as an excuse to plant, we do that. So that's quite a good one to look into as well, Phil, possibly. But yeah, combining that with that print management company could be a way to go forward and just have that as a little side, obviously with the primary focus of reducing carbon as a whole. There's another one here that I've got on the list, Colin, for you. So another sort of FAQ, which is ISO 14001 a good thing to go for? That's one I hear a lot in calls, at least.
That's a difficult one to go and answer. It's possibly one of the most boring things you can ever go and do. Doing any kind of ISO certification is frankly painful. and going through an audit, and it certainly doesn't make you a more environmentally friendly company by doing it. So you can gain ISO 14000 certification if you can prove that you are being really bad for the environment and you're documenting how well you are being bad for the environment. So I'm being slightly cynical there about the whole thing. It's a system to go and look at how you manage your environmental impact rather than how you reduce your environmental impact. But in many ways, that can be quite good. So giving the counter argument to that, anything that actually forces companies to go and understand what their impact is in the environment and to go and manage that carefully, that can make a difference. So that can always go and help them to go and improve things. So it's an okay standard, little bit old-fashioned nowadays. You tend to find for a lot of companies, it's a requirement for them to go and do business with some of their customers. So a lot of customers tend to go and demand ISO 14001, not because it's a great standard, because they don't always know what else to go and look for, to be honest with you. It's probably more relevant for companies that have a big environmental impact outside of carbon. It was originally developed to go and stop companies polluting rivers, or producing like radioactive waste or anything like that. It was really designed for the big heavy industry companies. For smaller companies, there are definitely some benefits, but probably more for manufacturing and services companies. So I don't want to put anybody off doing it. And maybe sounding slightly cynical of the standard here, but it's not a bad thing to go and have, but it's not the solution for many things.
I think sounding cynical is part of your job description, Colin.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So one more I've got here as well for you is: are there any other sort of regulations or new guidelines, I guess, that we should be aware of as businesses and as companies?
Yeah. There's an increasing amount coming out. So without wanting to drown you in acronyms too much here, I'll mention a few, and I'll mention reasons why you don't need to be scared of them, because there is a lot in the press. So CSRD is one of the big ones. There's a huge amount to talk about. If you are not a very large business, and if you are purely a UK business, then you don't need to worry about it. It's really just for European businesses or companies that are doing a large amounts of business in Europe on there. It has a lot of really good aspects in it. So it's overly detailed, like a lot of European things. So there's far too much detail and far too many words in it, but there are some good things in there. So it really does force companies, particularly big ones, to go and report and take action on 1,144 different pieces of data they've got to produce reporting on. But for most small and medium-sized businesses, it won't affect them. But do be aware of CSRD, because it is mentioned rather a lot at the moment, and there is a good chance that maybe some of the businesses on here as customers might be thinking about CSRD and talking about it to them as well. In the UK, so we're not in the EU anymore, sadly, or positively, depending whatever your point of view is. I'm ambiguous on that. So in the UK, we are not bound to CSRD at all. We are probably going to introduce some sustainability standards. I think now we've got very slightly more left-wing government in. There is a chance that we'll get a little bit more focus on this. The key ones to be aware of, though, are ones that have been around for a while. So SECR, which is Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting. Any business that turns over 36 million or more and has more than 250 employees generally has to go and report their carbon footprint to their annual report by law. So that's definitely one to be aware of. And I would also start thinking a little bit about your supply chain, because where those regulations are coming, there's an increasing amount of them are starting to get people to go and look at their suppliers and to look at what they're doing to make sure their suppliers are doing the right thing, both in terms of social responsibility, so like living wage, but also their environmental impact as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You may have seen it just come through, Colin, but there's another question here. We don't have a name on this one, but someone's mentioned, instead of planting trees, are there any other short-term solutions you could suggest to help with the biodiversity SDG? Would you recommend also that they look at local projects rather than focusing on planting trees across the world?
Good question. Yeah, tree planting tends to be put down as the answer to most things related to biodiversity, but it's a really good point. There are lots of things that could be done there. So trees are wonderful, but even with trees, you've got to go and think of that diversity aspect. If you're just planting the same kind of tree that's maybe not a native species and arranging for that to be planted in large areas, so that's not creating any kind of diversity at all. Realistically, what you want to be thinking of is natural, non-invasive species and trying to get a broad culture of different, both flora and fauna on there as well. So things like peatland restoration is a good one. So peat is something that attracts an awful lot of creatures within there. It also soaks up an awful lot of carbon, so that's always good. Anything related to marine as well can be quite good. So, if we look further afield, things like seagrass, but even like kelp around the local UK coastline can be quite good. Wildflower meadows, I think wildflower restoration is good. And this is where it's sometimes good to go and partner with an organisation, because I'm definitely not a biodiversity expert. And I'm kind of guessing that most people on this call aren't either. So working with other organisations that are is good to go and get that advice. But yeah, peatland restoration, wildflower meadows, even rewilding, things like that can make a big difference. And on that point of whether it should be local or planted on trees across the world, I think it's often good to go and align that with where your business is. If you're a global business, then, and the UK is only a small part of your operations, then maybe you do want to be thinking about making a difference globally. If you're just a UK business, then doing something in the UK is a good idea. So, but, truthfully, we need these things going on all around the world, but we are definitely going to get more passionate about doing this in areas that are close to us. And if you can get a chance to get people involved as well, if there is a chance to get employees out to go and plant trees or to go and restore some peatland or do some seed sowing or whatever the heck it happens to go and be, you'll find you engage people's hearts and minds a bit more. And it's far easier to do that locally than if it's somewhere slightly far flung.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Colin. That's about all the questions
Pleasure.
we have that have come out in the chat. So do you have any closing thoughts or statements that you wanted to convey across in this session at all?
No, I think probably the only thing I would say is just get started on these things. It is nowhere near as complicated as people think. We're all programmed as human beings to go and know what the right thing is to go and do. So sometimes the thing that feels right actually is right. And I'm hoping that some of those tips that I've given maybe give people a few ideas on how they can get things started or do more of something they're already doing. But get going with it. Do talk about it. Do shout about it. Plug, obviously, for things that we want to go and get people to go and look at. If you want to learn more, visit supportthegoals.org. Plenty of educational content out there as well, and get your business recognised for the good things it's doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time there, Colin. So yeah, what we'll
Sure.
do is if Colin has any resources or anything, we can send those to you, the attendees following this event. And I'm sure he'll send those over to myself. We will have a recording available of this event, so that will be listed on our public YouTube page, and we will send that out after as well. So I think that's pretty much everything from our end. So if you do have any questions further to this event in regards to sustainability, greener goals, or anything else, or need any contact details of Colin, then do get in touch with us. Our number is 01227 473 500. That's 01227 473 500. We'll get that eventually. Without further ado, then, thank you very much, Colin, for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all the attendees who joined us today, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.